Hey, stop scrolling for a second. I need you to hear this one. A little girl, 3 years old, barely able to tie her own shoes, looked a billionaire dead in the eyes and said one sentence that stopped him cold in his own driveway. She wasn't talking about toys. She wasn't talking about her mom. She was talking about a woman he was about to marry. A woman everyone trusted. A woman who smiled in every photo. But this child, this toddler who couldn't even spell her own name yet, somehow knew something was wrong before any adult in that house did. And what happened in the next 48 hours changed 4 lives forever. I wasn't going to tell this story, but I think you need to hear it. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we dive in, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you're new here, we tell real, emotional, sometimes hard to believe stories every week. And if that sounds like your thing, consider sticking around and subscribing. No pressure, just an open invitation. Hey, let's get into it. The rain started exactly at 6 p.m., which is how Daniel Hale would always remember it later. Because that was the exact time his life quietly began to change, and he didn't even know it yet. Daniel was 34 years old, and by every external measure, he had won at life. He'd built a logistics empire from a single rented warehouse into a company that moved freight across 11 countries. Forbes had photographed him twice. He owned a glass house on a hill that looked like it belonged in a magazine, not a neighborhood. And in 6 weeks, he was set to marry Vanessa Cole, 32, elegant, magnetic, the kind of woman who made entire rooms recalibrate when she walked in. To everyone watching from the outside, Daniel had everything. But have you ever noticed how the people with everything are sometimes the loneliest? Have you ever met someone who smiled in every photo but flinched every time their phone buzzed? That was Daniel. 3 months earlier, his housekeeper of 9 years, Marisol, had asked him a favor he almost said no to. Her childcare had fallen through. Could she bring her daughter to work, just for a few weeks? Just until she found someone reliable? Daniel had said yes without really thinking about it, the way busy, distracted people say yes to things that don't seem important. That's how Lily entered his house. Lily was 3. She had 2 missing front teeth from a fall the year before, a stuffed rabbit named Pancake that went everywhere with her, and an unsettling habit, unsettling in the way only honest children are, of saying exactly what she observed, with no filter, no diplomacy, no adult instinct to smooth things over. At first, Daniel barely noticed her. She was a small shadow trailing behind Marisol's mop bucket, humming to herself, talking to Pancake in a private language only the 2 of them understood. He'd nod at her in the hallway. She'd stare back at him with this unreadable steady gaze that made him feel, for half a second, like she was the adult in the room and he was the one being evaluated. He didn't think much of it. He had a wedding to plan, a company to run, and a fiancée who texted him things like, "Missed you today," in a way that still made his chest tighten, even after 2 years together. What would you do if a stranger's child suddenly started watching you like she knew something you didn't? Daniel didn't think to ask that question. Not yet. It was a Tuesday, gray, unremarkable, when he first noticed Lily go quiet around Vanessa. Not shy quiet. Not nervous quiet. Watchful quiet. Vanessa had come by the house to drop off seating charts for the wedding, breezing through the kitchen in her cream coat, kissing Daniel's cheek, calling out a cheerful "Hi, sweetie," to Lily without really looking at her. Lily didn't answer. She backed up 2 steps and gripped Pancake tighter. Marisol noticed it too. She crouched down later that evening and asked her daughter gently, "Why don't you like Miss Vanessa?" Lily had thought about it with the seriousness only a 3-year-old can summon and said, "She has 2 voices." Marisol had laughed it off at the time. Kids say strange things, that's just what kids do. But that night, after Lily was asleep, Marisol found herself replaying the sentence in her head. 2 voices. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't think it meant anything. But it would. Because 3 days later, Daniel would come home early. Earlier than anyone expected. and Lily would be standing at the top of the staircase in her pajamas, looking down at him with Pancake under one arm, and she would say the sentence that started everything. What do you think a toddler could possibly know that the adults around her didn't? Stay with me. 'Cause this is where it begins. 3 days. That's all it took for everything to shift. Daniel had come home unannounced. His afternoon meeting had been cancelled, and instead of going to the office, he'd decided, on a whim he couldn't quite explain, to come home and surprise Vanessa with dinner reservations at the restaurant where he'd proposed. He remembers feeling almost giddy walking up the driveway. Genuinely happy. The kind of happy he hadn't let himself feel in a while. That happiness lasted exactly until he opened the front door. The house was quiet. Too quiet for 4 p.m. on a weekday. Marisol's car wasn't in the driveway. She'd left early for a doctor's appointment, leaving Lily with her aunt, who was supposed to pick her up at 3. But there, at the top of the staircase, small bare feet on the cold marble, stood Lily. Alone. Pancake clutched to her chest. Her aunt was nowhere in sight. Have you ever walked into your own home and felt like a guest in someone else's story? That's exactly how Daniel described it later. Lily, he called up, confused. Sweetheart, where's your aunt? Lily didn't answer that question. Instead, she came down 2 steps, stopped, and looked at him with that same unreadable steadiness she'd had since the day they met. And then she said it, the sentence that would replay in Daniel's mind for the rest of his life. Don't let your fiancé take you home today. Daniel actually laughed, at first, a confused, nervous laugh, the kind you give when a sentence doesn't fit the moment. What do you mean, sweetheart? We are home. But Lily shook her head slowly, with this strange, grave patience. Not this home. The other one. She talks about the other one. On the phone. With the man who isn't you. Daniel felt the floor tilt slightly under him. He crouched down to her level, his heart suddenly loud in his own ears. What man, Lily? What phone? She shrugged, the way kids do when they don't have the vocabulary for what they've witnessed, only the memory of it. The phone in her purse. Pink one. Not the one she shows you. Have you ever had a moment where a single sentence from someone you'd never expect rearranges everything you thought you understood? That was this moment for Daniel. He wanted to dismiss it. God, he wanted to. He told himself, sitting right there on the staircase, that this was a baby talking. Babies confuse dreams and cartoons and overheard conversations from the television. Babies didn't understand adult betrayal. Babies didn't know what affairs were. But something in his gut, something old and animal and impossible to argue with, wouldn't let it go. That night, when Vanessa came home glowing, talking about florists and table linens, Daniel watched her in a way he never had before. Really watched her. The way she checked her phone twice during dinner and turned it face down each time. The way she'd mentioned offhand that she'd be in meetings most of next week. Vague, untraceable meetings, the kind with no names attached. He didn't confront her. Not yet. What would you do? Accuse the woman you love based on the word of a 3-year-old? And risk destroying everything over what might be nothing? Or stay silent, and risk ignoring the one honest voice in the entire house? Daniel chose, for now, to watch. Over the next several days, he noticed things he'd trained himself not to notice. The pink phone Lily mentioned. He found it once, buried beneath scarves in Vanessa's closet, the screen locked, the case scuffed like it had been used for a long time. He noticed Vanessa's wedding planning trips, that didn't always line up with actual venues. He noticed the new perfume she wore on the days she came home latest. Something unfamiliar, something that wasn't the bottle on her vanity. And every evening, Lily would watch him with that same quiet, patient gravity, like she was waiting for him to finally catch up to what she already knew. You believe me now? She asked him once, simply, while he was tying her shoe because Marisol's hands were full. Daniel didn't answer her. He didn't know how to answer a 3-year-old honestly without unraveling completely. But 4 nights later, everything would come into terrible, undeniable focus. When Daniel followed Vanessa's car instead of letting her drive him to the rehearsal dinner like she'd asked. What do you think he found? Rehearsal night. 6 days before the wedding. Vanessa had insisted on driving him. "Let me take you, it'll be romantic," she'd said, smiling that smile that had once made him feel like the luckiest man alive. But Daniel, for the first time in their relationship, told a small, deliberate lie. He said his car was already at the venue. He said he'd meet her there. Instead, he got into his car 20 minutes after her, and followed at a careful distance. She didn't go to the venue. She drove 25 minutes in the opposite direction, into a part of the city Daniel barely recognized. Quiet, residential, unremarkable streets lined with modest townhouses, nothing like the world Vanessa usually moved through. She parked outside a pale blue house with a wraparound porch, checked her makeup in the mirror, and let herself in with a key. Not a knock. Have you ever felt your whole understanding of a person collapse in real time, watching from a car, unable to look away? That's where Daniel sat for the next 40 minutes, gripping the steering wheel. His heart somewhere between his throat and his stomach. When the front door finally opened again, Vanessa stepped out, laughing, relaxed, lighter than Daniel had seen her in months. And behind her in the doorway was a man, mid-30s. Familiar in a vague, gnawing way Daniel couldn't immediately place. The man kissed her goodbye. Not a friendly kiss, not a polite kiss, and said something that made her laugh again before she walked back to her car. Daniel sat frozen, his mind doing a strange, desperate arithmetic, trying to make the math add up to anything other than what it obviously was. Then it hit him. The man's face. He'd seen it before. In passing at an industry dinner 8 months ago. The man was Adrian Voss, a real estate developer Vanessa had introduced as an old family friend when Daniel had asked. Old family friend. The phrase echoed now with a different, sour weight. What would you have done in that car, watching the woman you were about to marry walk out of another man's house, lighter and happier than she'd been with you in months? Daniel didn't confront her that night. He drove home a different route, arrived before her, and sat in the dark kitchen until she walked in, breathless, apologizing for being stuck in traffic. He looked at her and said nothing. He smiled even. He kissed her cheek and said he was tired from work. That night, lying beside her, listening to her breathe evenly in her sleep, Daniel finally let himself ask the question he'd been avoiding. How long? Because the more he thought about it, replaying months of half-truths and meetings, and the way she'd sometimes flinch when he hugged her too tightly from behind, like she was guilty of something even when he didn't know to suspect anything, the answer started to feel like it wasn't days or weeks. It felt like it had been there from close to the beginning. The next morning, he found Lily in the kitchen with Marisol, eating cereal, Pancake propped in the chair beside her like a small silent witness. He crouched down to her level, something he now did instinctively, the way you'd consult someone you trusted. "I saw," he told her quietly. "You were right." Lily nodded, unsurprised, the way children are when adults finally catch up to truths they've known for a while. Then she said something that stopped him cold for the second time in a week. "She doesn't talk about you when she's happy. She talks about you when she's worried you'll find out." Have you ever heard a sentence so simple and so devastating that it rearranges your entire memory of a relationship? Daniel had to leave the kitchen. He stood in the hallway, hand braced against the wall, breathing through something that felt dangerously close to grief. Because here's the part that hurt the most. It wasn't just that Vanessa was lying. It was that a 3-year-old with no agenda, no stake in any of it, had seen the truth of his own engagement more clearly than he had in 2 years of living inside it. The wedding was in 5 days. And Daniel had absolutely no idea yet just how much deeper this betrayal actually went, because what he'd discovered in that pale blue house was only the surface of it. Here's where the story takes a turn most people don't see coming. Daniel hired a private investigator the next morning. Quietly, carefully, paying in a way that wouldn't show up on any account Vanessa had access to. He told himself he needed proof, not for revenge, but because some small, stubborn part of him still hoped he was wrong. Hoped there was an explanation. Hoped Lily's tender 3-year-old observations had been a coincidence stacked on top of his own paranoia. He was not wrong. The investigator's report came back in 4 days, right as wedding preparations were reaching their peak, with flower deliveries and final dress fittings and Vanessa's mother calling twice a day about table arrangements. The report was 11 pages. Daniel read every one of them standing in his garage at midnight so no one in the house would see his face. Adrian Voss wasn't just an affair. Adrian Voss was Vanessa's business partner in a property development deal that had quietly collapsed 18 months earlier. A deal that had left Vanessa exposed to almost $2 million in debt she had never told Daniel about. The wedding, the report suggested, wasn't simply a romance reaching its natural conclusion. It was a rescue plan. Vanessa needed Daniel's name, his accounts, his credit, his stability. Needed it before her creditors closed in, before the debt became public, before her carefully built image collapsed. Marrying Daniel wasn't just love, or wasn't only love. It was also, possibly mostly, a lifeline. Have you ever discovered that something you believed was the most genuine part of your life was actually underneath a calculation? That the person who said, "I love you," most beautifully might have also been doing math in her head while she said it. Daniel sat in that garage for almost 2 hours. He didn't cry, not at first. He just felt strangely, terribly calm. The calm of someone standing at the exact center of a storm, where everything is suddenly, eerily still. The next morning, he didn't confront Vanessa directly. Instead, he did something that surprised even him. He asked Marisol if he could sit with Lily for a while. Marisol, sensing something was deeply wrong but too respectful to pry, agreed. Daniel sat on the kitchen floor, a billionaire in a $3,000 suit, sitting cross-legged on his own kitchen tile, while Lily showed him how Pancake liked to read her picture books. "You knew all of it, didn't you?" he asked her quietly, not really expecting an answer a child could give. Or not knew. Felt it. Lily considered this with her usual seriousness. "Pancake doesn't like loud voices that pretend to be soft," she said. "Miss Vanessa's voice is loud pretending to be soft." Daniel felt something crack open in his chest. Because that was it, exactly, that was the precise, perfect description of 2 years of his relationship that he hadn't had the language for. Loud pretending to be soft. What would you do? Sitting with the one honest voice you found in your entire life, knowing the wedding is 2 days away and everyone else still believes it's a fairy tale. Daniel made a decision that night. Not to expose Vanessa publicly, not yet. Not in front of 300 guests, not in front of her mother who had been nothing but kind to him. He decided instead to give Vanessa one chance to tell him the truth herself in private before the wedding. One real chance. He invited her to dinner the night before the rehearsal, told her he wanted one quiet night, just us before everything gets crazy. She arrived glowing, in a green dress he'd once told her he loved. Halfway through dinner, he set down his fork and asked her, gently, plainly, "Is there anything about the wedding, about us, that you think I should know?" Vanessa's smile didn't waver. Not even slightly. "Like what, baby?" And in that half-second pause, in that perfectly composed, perfectly loving, perfectly loud pretending to be soft smile, Daniel understood with total, devastating clarity that she was never going to tell him. Not now. Not on her own. Not ever unless she was caught. He smiled back at her. "Nothing," he said. "Just checking." But he had already, quietly, made his decision. What happens at the wedding itself? That's the part of this story you won't be able to look away from. The morning of the wedding, the house was chaos in the way only weddings can be. Caterers moving in and out, a string quartet rehearsing in the garden, Vanessa's mother crying happy tears over the dress hanging in the guest room. And in the middle of all of it, completely unnoticed, sat Lily, in a tiny flower girl dress 2 sizes too big, clutching Pancake, watching everyone with that same steady ancient patience. Daniel found a quiet moment with her before the ceremony, kneeling down in his tuxedo, looking into the small, serious face that had upended his entire understanding of his own life in the span of 2 weeks. "I'm not going to marry her," he told Lily quietly. "Not today. Maybe not ever. But I need you to know. None of this is because of you. You didn't break anything. You just saw something true, and you were brave enough to say it. Most grown-ups aren't even that brave." Lily nodded slowly, processing this with the same gravity she brought to everything. "Pancake says you're going to be okay. Have you ever needed permission from the smallest, most unexpected source? And somehow that was exactly the permission that mattered most." What Daniel did next, he later admitted, wasn't fully planned. He didn't storm the ceremony. He didn't make a scene in front of 300 guests, didn't humiliate Vanessa publicly the way some version of him might have wanted to, in his angriest moments. Instead, 15 minutes before the ceremony was set to begin, he asked Vanessa to meet him privately in the small side room off the chapel, the one meant for the officiant, quiet, away from guests. She came in radiant, veil already pinned, certain this was a sweet, private pre-wedding moment. Daniel closed the door gently. "I know about Adrian," he said simply. "I know about the debt. I know this wedding was never just about love for you, or maybe it was somewhere in there, but it was also a way out. And I need you to know that I know before you walk down that aisle." The color drained from Vanessa's face in real time. She didn't deny it, not at first. Have you ever watched someone's mask slip in real time? Watched the loud pretending soft voice finally crack into something raw and unrehearsed? "Daniel, please," she said, voice shaking now, all performance gone. "It's not, it's complicated. I do love you. The debt, that's separate, that's..." "Is it?" he asked quietly. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty connected." She tried for several long minutes, every version of explanation. It started as one thing and became another. She'd meant to tell him eventually. She'd been scared he'd leave if she told him about the debt. Adrian meant nothing. Adrian meant everything. The truth blurring with every sentence she offered, contradicting itself until even she seemed to lose track of which version she was telling. Daniel let her finish. Then he said the only thing left to say. "I'm not walking down that aisle today. I think somewhere you already knew I wouldn't. What do you think it takes to walk away from a life you spent 2 years building? On your own wedding day with 300 guests waiting?" He walked out of that side room, found Vanessa's mother first. Gentle, apologetic, taking responsibility for the public part of the cancellation himself, so Vanessa wouldn't have to face that humiliation alone, despite everything. He addressed the guests with simple, dignified honesty. The wedding would not be happening, the reasons were private, and he was deeply sorry for the disruption to everyone's day. Then he found Marisol, found Lily, still in her oversized flower girl dress, and crouched down one more time. "Thank you," he told her, voice thick. "You saved me from something I couldn't see." Lily reached out and patted his cheek the way you'd comfort someone much smaller than yourself. "Pancake says you're welcome. But here's what nobody, not Daniel, not Marisol, not even Lily herself, could have predicted yet. The story doesn't end with a cancelled wedding. It ends with something Daniel discovers 3 weeks later that changes everything he thought he understood about how this entire chain of events began. 3 weeks after the wedding that never happened, Daniel sat in his study, finally beginning to feel like himself again. The house was quieter without the constant hum of wedding preparations, without Vanessa's presence filling every room with performance. Marisol still came twice a week to clean, Lily trailing behind her, Pancake always in tow. One afternoon, while Daniel was sorting through old files in his study, paperwork from before the engagement, before Vanessa, things he hadn't touched in over 2 years, he found something that stopped him completely. Folder. Slightly yellowed at the edges. Inside it, paperwork from 9 years ago, when Marisol had first been hired, and a name on an old emergency contact form that made his blood run cold. Marisol's late husband, Lily's father, who Daniel had always understood had passed away before Lily was born, was listed not by the name Marisol had always used, but by a different name entirely. A name Daniel recognized instantly, because he'd seen it 11 pages deep in a private investigator's report just weeks earlier. Adrian Voss. Have you ever felt the ground shift twice in one story? Once when you think you understand the betrayal, and again when you realize the betrayal has roots you never imagined. Daniel sat frozen, staring at the paper, his mind racing backward through every interaction of the past 3 months. He found Marisol in the kitchen that evening, and very gently, very carefully, asked her about it. What unfolded was not the scandal Daniel braced for, but something sadder and somehow more human. Marisol explained, voice trembling, that Adrian was indeed Lily's biological father, a relationship that had ended painfully years before Lily was born, when Adrian chose his career and his ambitions over a young family he wasn't ready for. Marisol had raised Lily alone, proudly, asking nothing of him. What Marisol hadn't known, what genuinely stunned her as much as it stunned Daniel, was that Adrian was now entangled with Vanessa. She'd had no idea. She'd recognized his name once, weeks ago, when Lily came home repeating fragments of conversations she'd overheard during the days Marisol occasionally brought her on errands near Vanessa's old apartment, back before the engagement, back when Marisol still cleaned there too. Lily hadn't understood what she'd seen. Not really. Not in any way a 3-year-old could explain in normal language. But somewhere in that small, observant mind, she had registered something. The same man's voice in 2 different women's lives, and a feeling, a child's pure, unfiltered feeling, that something about it wasn't right. She hadn't known she was protecting Daniel from anything specific. She'd simply absorbed a truth too large for her vocabulary, and translated it into the only language she had. Don't let your fiancé take you home today. Have you ever considered that the people we dismiss as too young, too small, too unimportant to understand the world might actually be the ones seeing it most clearly, because they haven't yet learned to look away from uncomfortable truths? Daniel sat with this for a long time. Marisol, mortified, apologized repeatedly, terrified this revelation would cost her the job, the trust, the relationship she'd built with Daniel over 9 careful years. But Daniel did something that surprised her completely. He thanked her. Because none of this was Marisol's fault, or Lily's fault. A little girl's unprocessed memory of 2 voices belonging to 2 different people in her small world had become, by complete accident, the single honest thread in a house full of beautifully constructed lies. Lily hadn't been some mystical, all-knowing child. She'd simply been paying attention, in the pure, unguarded way only children do, before the world teaches them to doubt themselves into silence. 6 months later, Daniel's company quietly funded Lily's entire education trust, not as charity, he insisted, but as gratitude, plain and simple. Marisol stayed on, no longer as an employee exactly, but as something closer to family. And Daniel, slowly, began rebuilding a version of trust he thought Vanessa had taken from him forever. He never married Vanessa. He never spoke to Adrian Voss. But every year on the anniversary of the wedding that never happened, he sends Lily a small gift, usually something for Pancake, who by all accounts is still very much in charge of telling the truth in that household. So here's what this story leaves us with. Sometimes the truth doesn't come wrapped in evidence or confrontation or grand confessions. Sometimes it comes from the smallest, quietest voice in the room, the one we're most likely to overlook. How many truths in our own lives are we missing, simply because we've stopped listening to the people too small, too soft-spoken, or too unimportant to be taken seriously? If this story moved you, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who need to hear it. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and what part of this story hit you the hardest. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. And if you've got time for just one more, click the next video. I promise it's just as unforgettable.